I was happening, y'all? It's your boy Rico from Street Scores, and of course, like I said, every week, including the preseason, regular season, and I'm speaking it into existence, the postseason, we got to take a look at all of the Pro Football Focus grades and a lot of advanced stats after every game. We do the offense one video, and we do defense and special teams the next, and today I really want to focus on where Jahan Dotson played at the most, whether it be outside or in the slot, and was it like a healthy mix of both, where it was Curtis Samuel, where it was Terry McLaurin. So we're definitely going to dive into that when we get to the receiver section. But the way Pro Football Focus organizes their grades, there's passing, there's running, and there's receiving. So it can be the same player in multiple categories. Sam Howell, because he likes to run, is going to be in passing and running. Running backs are going to be in both rushing and receiving, especially Antonio Gibson, where he did most of his work in the receiving game. He was more of a receiver than a running back in the preseason game against the Chiefs. So again, we're going to take a look at grades. I'm not here to necessarily agree or disagree. I just want to present the grades and try to get a decent grasp of how guys played, good or bad, or in different ways. Some guy may have been really good at blocking, but terrible in receiving. One guy may have been really good at receiving, but terrible at running. All kinds of stuff like that. And again, I really want to take a deep dive into specific snaps and where they were played, especially for the receiver. But before we dive into all of that, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell next to the subscription button so you get notification immediately. And every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one, make sure you pull up every Friday for the broadcast podcast, 7 to 9 p.m., where we talk about everything, anything funny, whether it's music, gaming, sports, anime, whatever. And then also make sure you pull up every Sunday for the call-in show at 6 p.m. again every Sunday, where y'all call in, you voice your opinions about the Commanders, whether it's good or bad or both, or if you have any questions that you may want to ask. Any of the comments that I don't get to in videos, if you want to call up and ask those questions, it can even not be Commander related. And without further ado, let's get it. Alright, so of course, starting with just the overall grades, Alex Erickson was our highest graded player. Cam Sims was second, Sadiq Charles was third, Dax Milne fourth, Jonathan Williams fifth, Antonio Gibson sixth, Alex Akingbulu, who I believe was placed on IR soon after the game, sadly, was seventh, Terry McLaurin eighth, Jahan Dotson ninth, Keith Ishmael 10th, and it just goes on and on and on. And then here's the rest of the list. If you want to pause it to like get a good look of all of the grades, you can. But of course, the most notable thing is that we're trying to look for the starters. And what really sticks out is Carson Wentz at the bottom, Chase Roulier at the bottom, my boy Armani Rogers towards the bottom, Kelvin Harmon, who was released, towards the bottom, Curtis Samuel, Cornelius Lucas, who was our starting left tackle in that game, Taylor Heineke, Brian Robinson is surprising, Samuel Cosme surprising me a little bit. And Alex Erickson has consistently been towards the top both of these preseason games. And I'm curious as to whether or not he'll do the same thing in this next preseason game, this upcoming one against the Ravens. But it's really interesting that he's continuing to be at the top, and it's not for special teams. It's always on the receiver side of things. Is he honestly making a strong case to make this roster for real? But I highly doubt the Washington Commanders are looking at Pro Football Focus grades and basing who makes the team on whether or not certain guys have certain grades on the team from Pro Football Focus. But it's really interesting because if Pro Football Focus feels like Alex Erickson is out here balling out, at least some of that has to be actually happening on the field. And so maybe he is doing something. I'm gonna have to go back and look at the tape because, you know, whether I agree or disagree with a lot of these points, I'm gonna talk through it a little bit, but not gonna super dive into it. But like a lot of the times, it's just maybe I need to go back and look at the tape and really focus in on what Alex Erickson was doing for him to be our highest graded defensive player out of the entire day. Remember, the starters played almost like an entire half. At least a lot of them did. And so for Alex Erickson to be rated that high, I mean, granted, he was only out there with the backups, so he was going against backups, but he was also playing with backups. And if he was just the most stellar backup out there, according to Pro Football Focus, that's a strong case to make the team. And then probably his direct competition in the receiver room, Dax Milne, is not far behind in receiving. And I also think it's really interesting that Sadiq Charles was our highest graded offensive lineman, and Cam Sims, other than Alex Erickson, as far as who played with the starters and at the very least the second stringers, Cam Sims was our highest graded receiver. And Antonio Gibson was graded way higher than Brian Robinson. Now let's go to passing and see exactly what happened here. All right, so Taylor Heineke and Carson Wentz wise, you can see the stats. So just to remind y'all, if you ever want to pause the video video to get a longer look at certain things like all of these stats, feel free to do so, but I will continue going on. Of course, Taylor Heinicke had the only touchdown out of our quarterbacks, and Sam Howell had the only interception, but still, Carson Wentz was the lowest grade, and it felt like he had the lowest passing grade. Taylor Heinicke and Sam Howell were the same there, and then Sam Howell ran enough to actually receive a run grade, unlike Taylor Heinicke and Carson Wentz, and he also had a higher fumble grade again. I mean, when nobody fumbles, it's really hard for me to exactly understand how they grade this, but apparently Sam Howell was better at protecting the ball, and that's why he received the highest grade out of all of the quarterbacks. And they're not counting that interception against them, because Taylor Heinicke apparently had one turnover-worthy play, which was 7.1% of the plays that he played, because he didn't play a lot. And Sam Howell, even though he had a turnover, they feel like he didn't. So, again, looking back at it, it did seem like that interception, it was more so the receiver's fault, like he ran the wrong route and things like that. And Pro Football Focus feels the same exact way. Now, of course, Sam Howell still went out there and made a lot of rookie mistakes, and there's a reason he's still QB3. And I felt like, honestly, the play before the interception was a worse throw. But technically, that interception was not his fault, and Pro Football Focus again agrees. It was more so a bad route. And then adjusted completion percentage-wise, Carson Wentz and Sam Howell had the same exact one. Taylor Heinicke had the highest one. Average depth of target, Taylor Heinicke actually had the highest, and Carson Wentz had the lowest. But Carson Wentz has just been going with this dink and dunk, take the safe play offense so far in preseason. We'll see if they try to air it out against the Ravens. And this is one of the main reasons I do these videos. I like the advanced statistics more than I like the grades, but of course we're going to take a look at the grades as well. 2 of Sam Howell's balls were batted. None of their throws were dropped. If there were any incompletions, it was due to inaccuracy or a good play by the defender, but no drops from the receivers. No, just wide open to the chest drops. And then passer rating wise, I mean, granted, nobody really played long enough for these passer ratings to really matter, but Taylor Heinicke had the highest one with a 121.2, Carson Wentz had an 87.3, and Sam Howell had a 53.5. But again, that interception took him way down, and that was more so on the receiver than him. And then even pressure wise, Taylor Heinicke was pressured twice. Carson Wentz was pressured once, and the only time he was pressured was that one sack where, I mean, you can argue it was kind of a mix of both of like the offensive line's fault. Also, great coverage by the Chiefs defense to cause Carson Wentz to hold on to the ball longer. And then, I mean, you can also kind of blame Carson Wentz because I think it was Antonio Gibson or Brian Robinson underneath that was open that he could have hit. But granted, a lot of that started from the Samuel Cosmi false start that pushed them back, like Ron Rivera said, that caused them to completely change what play they were trying to even go with. They were going to originally go with like a short, quick little route to get the first down from one of the receivers, and then Samuel Cosmi's false start took them back 5 yards, and then it became 3rd and long, and then now they had to run a play with longer developing routes, and then the offensive line got beat up pretty bad, and then Carson Wentz was out there trying to scramble for his life, and it would have been nice if he could have thrown the ball away. And of course, as the quarterback, you're within field goal range to take a sack there. It's terrible, but it's kind of one of those plays where it's a little bit of everybody's fault, especially offensive line and Carson Wentz. And then Sam Howell was pressured 7 times and sacked twice. And then average time to throw, Sam Howell technically had the most time to throw, even though he was hit the most, but that's probably because he was scrambling around and then had more time to throw because he would get outside of the pocket and try to figure out what he was going to do afterwards. And then Taylor Heinicke had the lowest time to throw, but it wasn't much lower than Carson Wentz. And that's proven by the fact that Sam Howell was the only one with scrambles, which are defined as undesigned runs by the quarterback. And then no penalties from either one, so that's pretty nice. And now moving to the rushing grades, Sam Howell actually has the highest rushing grade out of our entire team, which is really interesting. Jonathan Williams 2nd, Alex Erickson 3rd, Jared Patterson 4th, Reggie Bonifon 5th, Antonio Gibson 6th, and Brian Robinson 7th. And I know screens are technically a passing play, like Carson Wentz throwing that screen to Jahan Dotson and then him taking it like 15 yards is technically a passing play. But with him receiving the ball in the backfield, I would have liked to see him included in the rushing grades because he got the ball in the backfield and he had to make everything work. He had to use his vision to set up his blockers. And shouts out to Curtis Samuel for having a really good block further down the field on that play as well. But I just feel like Jahan Dotson should be included in the rushing grades for that screenplay, but technically it is a passing play, so I guess Pro Football Focus has a conundrum there, and they just decided to not include screens in the running category, even though all of that was running. There was very little receiving and way more running. Of course, our highest yard rusher was Brian Robinson, but they felt like he wasn't that good at running. I guess maybe he missed some holes and stuff, they felt like, but to me, I thought he did really well, because first of all, yards after contact, he had the most close with that, 22. And even beyond that, if you want to just neutralize it to where everybody basically has the same sample size and you go percentages and you go per attempt, Jonathan Williams had 3.25 yards after contact per attempt, but Brian Robinson had 2.75, which is also really good. And Alex Erickson, with his one rush, technically had the highest yards per attempt overall, which was a nice play design by Scott Turner, and Alex Erickson executed it pretty well. So Alex Erickson is trying to show that he could do everything that he possibly can to make this team. And it's kind of crazy too, because on that rushing play out of the backfield, he looked faster there than he's ever looked in the returning game for us so far. So that's why I thought it was really weird. I was like, where was all of this speed and explosion in any of the returns that you've done so far this preseason? He's looked pretty bad returning wise so far this preseason, but he looked really good out of the backfield on that one play. And that's why Pro Football Focus felt like he deserved at least a 62.8 running grade. But again, I just is so weird that Alex Erickson being handed the ball out of the backfield is just completely different than the Jahan Dotson getting the screen out of the backfield, according to Pro Football Focus and according to just how the NFL defines certain things. But they're essentially the same thing. They both got the ball out of the backfield in different ways. Jahan Dotson's was just behind the line of scrimmage, but technically thrown forward by Carson Wentz. Was Alex Erickson was technically a backwards toss, handoff, throw, whatever. And I guess that's the exact distinct difference right there. And Brian Robinson, the majority of his carries, 5 out of 8, came from a zone scheme. 3 came from a gap scheme. Again, the Pro Football Focus grades are interesting, but I'm mostly here for the advanced statistics and to see what guys were exactly doing. And of course, Sam Howell had no design runs. All his yards came from scrambles. That's why he has 13 scramble yards, no design run yards. All of Brian Robinson's yards as a running back were, of course, design runs, no scramble yards. He's not a quarterback. Also, Brian Robinson was able to get 3 first downs out of his runs, which I think is very significant. And then surprisingly, Brian Robinson had the highest pass block grade out of all of our running backs. Antonio Gibson technically didn't have a pass blocking snap. Anytime he was in there for a passing play, he went out as a receiver, which is how it really should be the vast majority of the time. But that's very encouraging that Brian Robinson had a really good pass blocking day, and really everybody did. Everybody is neck and neck when it comes to the grades. Shouts out to Jared Patterson, shouts out to Jonathan Williams and Reggie Bonifant. As of right now, JD McKissic is still our best pass blocker, but it's very encouraging to see that these guys are stepping up and not looking abysmal, because these grades were much lower last week when it came to pass blocking for these running backs. It was way worse. So shouts out to them for really improving in that category, because that's going to be huge. That's going to really factor in how much Brian Robinson is on the field. I'm not worried about him running the ball at all. I'm not worried about him even receiving the ball. But what's really going to keep him off the field is his pass blocking, and that's why JD McKissic will come in quite a bit, because right now he's our best pass blocking running back. But Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson are way bigger than him, way stronger. There's no excuse. If JD McKissic can pass block, then they should be able to pass block even better, because they are stronger and bigger. It's just all about technique. And then receiving wise, we're just going to ignore overall offense grade. We're going to go straight to receiving. And Jonathan Williams, Pro Football Focus feels like he was our best receiver. Alex Erickson was the second, and Antonio Gibson was the third, and it looked like it. Antonio Gibson was out there looking really good out in space. Granted, it was mostly due to work against the backups, but even when he was out there with the starters with Carson Wentz, when Brian Robinson would sit on the sideline for a couple of plays, there was one passing play where Brian Robinson, I think it was a safety or a linebacker, he got separation on him like Terry McLaurin would. Like, it was a good amount of separation, and Carson Wentz just slightly overthrew him out of bounds. And overall, Antonio Gibson just had good grades across the board. Again, technically didn't pass block, but everything else he looked pretty good. I'm surprised that his grade is this low as far as offense goes. There has to be something else playing into this equation that I'm missing. But they also felt like Cam Sims did pretty well. They felt like Dax Milne did pretty well. I'm surprised by Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson's low grades, but again, I'm not here to really disagree or agree with the grades. We're more so here for the advanced statistics. And as far as yards per reception, my boy Armani Rogers had the most, which I think is significant. Even though his receiving grade is abysmal, his pass blocking grade is better than I thought it would be, especially since I believe he was one of the people that was part of that Carson Wentz sack that kind of let Carson Wentz down, along with the offensive lineman who I believe was Samuel Cosme on the play on that sack. But my boy Armani Rogers is standing out one way or another every week, and I love it. I really hope he finds a way and paves a way to make this roster. And with him getting so much time with the first team, even though it's mostly due to injuries, I'm just really excited that he's also stepping up, most importantly, pass blocking wise. I mean, his athleticism, his receiving ability is eventually going to be unlocked. That's an automatic. He's an athletic freak, and that's why I feel like he could eventually become like a Darren Waller type of guy. But the fact that he's improving as a pass blocker is going to be one of the main reasons, if not the main reason that he makes this team if he does end up making the 53-man roster. So that's very encouraging for me. Of course, Alex Erickson was second, Terry McLaurin third, and then Eli Wolf, surprisingly, Georgia Bulldog, 12.5 fourth, and Antonio Gibson, 12.3 fifth. But a lot of his stuff was just making guys missing yards after catch type of stuff. And then pass blocking snaps wise, Armani Rogers had 2, Eli Wolf had 2, Reggie Bonifant had 1, and Jonathan Williams had 1. But now this is the part that probably a lot of y'all are mostly here for, is the slot snaps. And now Armani Rogers technically worked in the slot more than he worked in line, so that's really interesting. In line wise, he was only there twice. Eli Wolf was in line 5 times and in the slot 19. So neither of these guys are really running the John Bates role. They're more so out there like Mike Gesicki's. But again, they were in line, and Armani Rogers blocked pretty well from what I saw outside of that Carson Wentz sack from the slot and in line. So again, that's going to be one of the main reasons he makes his team, if he can be a dual threat tight end. We already know what he's going to be able to do receiving wise. He's only been playing the tight end position for like 2-3 months. He literally switched from quarterback to tight end just like 3 months ago at the East West Shrine Bowl weekend. His first time ever running a route in his life. He's been a quarterback pretty much his entire life. And so the fact that he's already this advanced receiving wise and being able to separate against NFL corners, starting corners, I mean, the sky's the limit there. Again, the emphasis is on how well he'll be able to block and how soon he'll get there. But then, most importantly, for those of y'all who are really wondering, Jahan Dotson was in the slot 8 times, but he was out wide 14. That's very significant because Curtis Samuel was in the slot 9 times, more than Jahan Dotson, but he was also out there just less in general. But he was out wide 0. So anytime that Jahan Dotson was on the field, Curtis Samuel was in the slot. Anytime Jahan Dotson was in the slot, that meant Curtis Samuel just wasn't on the field. It was somebody else. So that's really interesting. As of right now, Jahan Dotson's more of an outside receiver, but it's a nice, healthy blend of both. Whereas Curtis Samuel is strictly a slot receiver right now, but he did a lot of motions in that Panthers preseason game. They didn't motion him as much in the Chiefs game, but I'm pretty sure when we get to the regular season, he's going to be motioned a lot. Just back and forth to show Carson Wentz whether or not the opposing defense is in zone or man coverage and who's trying to cover who and things like that. Make it easier for Carson Wentz to read the defense pre-snap. And then Dax Milne was surprisingly only in the slot 5 times and outside 12. I'm actually pretty surprised by that. De'Ami Brown in the slot 5, outside 14. I'm actually surprised he was in the slot that much because right now we're looking at him as a deep threat, and even though he's not separating as much as we'd hope, I'm still not surprised that he's been outside more than anything else. And then Cam Sims was in the slot 4 times, but he was mostly out wide 13. So again, just like last week, this kind of shows who's competing with each other. Like slot wise, it's really Alex Erickson, Curtis Samuel, and usually it's supposed to be Dax Milne competing kind of for like the slot and the backup slot roles. And then Jahan Dotson's kind of like a mix of both, which I think is going to actually translate to real regular season games. Scott Turner's going to have that man everywhere, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being outside a little bit more than he is in the slot, especially again when we go out there with the starters. Curtis Samuel seems like he's primarily going to be in the slot, even though he'll probably be outside a couple of times here and there. With Curtis Samuel dominating the slot, that means Jahan Dotson will primarily be on the outside with them on the field at the same time. But then outside wise, you have De'Ami Brown, Cam Sims, and apparently Dax Milne all competing for these outside snaps, along with like Mark and Michelle, who's trying to make the team. And of course, Terry McLaurin is primarily outside. He had 1 slot snap, which I'm not surprised about. He's going to do that from time to time. But for the most part, he's your outside X receiver. And then it's really significant that Antonio Gibson, not even just outside of the backfield, he was in the slot 1 play and out wide 1 play. And I think that's very significant. Even though it was 1 play, I think that's huge. We need to utilize Antonio Gibson as a receiver far more often. And not even just out of the backfield, but even like literally lined up as a receiver. Like have Brian Robinson in the backfield and Antonio Gibson maybe start in the backfield and then motion out wide right before the snap and things like that. I think that will create a lot of mismatches for opposing defenses. Please do that. And then lastly, just blocking grades wise, Alex Akingbulu had the highest pass block grade. Chase Roulier right behind him, which is really good news. Even though his run blocking grade was abysmal, that's still very encouraging, even though he's still ramping up and dealing with injuries, that he could pass block that well. Then Willie Bevers had your 3rd. Brian Robinson was 4th. That's very encouraging. And it's a whole run on running backs. And then you get to Samuel Cosme, who him and Chase Roulier usually have higher run block grades than pass block grades, but it's preseason, so I'm not going to really buy into that too much right now. I'm just going to look at it and see that it's very encouraging that these pass block grades are higher than I expected. And then Eli Wolf, Armani Rogers, pass blocking better than I expected for sure, especially Armani Rogers. Him having a 70 is very encouraging. Chris Paul was pretty much just about neutral both ways. 66 run block, 69 pass block. I don't know why his grade is just that low overall. I don't know what he did wrong. And then Sadiq Charles was a really good run blocker, but they felt like his pass blocking was terrible. And then John Toth, they felt like his run blocking was pretty good, but his pass blocking was the worst out of the entire team. Really interesting. And then Aaron Montero, I mean, he's technically like our fourth string guard. He had to start at right guard. That's why they have this right here, your true starters right here. Aaron Montero was just starting right guard, and he just apparently did not live up to the moment. Out of all of the starters, he was by far graded the worst, and I can believe that because, again, he's the guy furthest on the depth chart that had to start. Chase Roulier was our starting center. He's supposed to be. Samuel Cosme is our starting right tackle. He's supposed to be. Technically, Armani Rogers is not our starting tight end. That's just due to injury. Cornelius Lucas is not our starting left tackle. That's due to injury. Sadiq Charles is not your starting left guard. That's because Andrew Norwell is out. And then Aaron Montero is not your starting right guard. That's because Trey Turner was out. And out of all of the guys that had to step up, again, the guy the furthest on the depth chart for a reason had the lowest grade, which makes a lot of sense. And then Precious allowed. Willie Beavers allowed a sack. Keith Ishmael apparently allowed a sack and a hurry. Aaron Montero out there struggling with the starters allowed 2 hits. Chris Paul allowed a hurry. Alex Akingbulu allowed a hurry, even though he had our highest pass blocking grade. John Toth allowed 2 hurries, and nobody else has any significant stats in those categories. And overall, the most pressures were allowed by John Toth, Keith Ishmael, and again, Aaron Montero. Out of the top 6 guys was the only starter. And I'm surprised that Chris Paul technically isn't above him on the depth chart from what I've seen in training camp and even in preseason games so far. I'm actually pretty surprised Chris Paul isn't the one getting the start in place while Wes Schweitzer and Andrew Norwell and Trey Turner are injured over in Aaron Montero. I also think it's pretty interesting how everybody kind of moved around. Like Aaron Montero was mostly right guard with the starters, then played some left guard with the backups. And then you had Keith Ishmael, of course, he's just straight up center, nothing else. That pretty much shows you everything you need to know there. But John Toth mostly played a left guard, but also played a couple of snaps at center. And then everybody else was primarily at where they were at the entire game. But I think that's pretty interesting to see some of these guys played multiple positions, well, played more than one position within the day. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section, let me know how you feel about everything discussed in this video. Please leave a like on this video if you liked it, if you learned anything. And definitely let me know how you feel about the certain snaps and grades that we discussed, advanced statistics as well, like Jahan Dotson being more of an outside receiver than a slot, Curtis Samuel pretty much primarily being a slot receiver, only a slot receiver in the Chiefs game, and Antonio Gibson, the way he was out there balling in the receiving game, man, that man was out there doing his thing. I mean, I'm not surprised that he had a 74.9, man. And of course, man, I appreciate all of the support, man. Shouts out to all of my sponsors, especially my Pro Bowl sponsors, whose name you see scrolling on the screen right now. I'm gonna catch y'all later. I'm out.